Hey everyone, this is the second time I've tried to create this video, and with my pen malfunctioning, it is creating a little bit of stress. So I may be pausing the video to try and type when my pen malfunctions. Okay, so here we are talking about Darwin and how he developed his theory of evolution. Um, so if we think about Darwin and his time period, we're talking around the 1800s. And Darwin and scientists, along with the general public who followed the sort of rules of church and religion primarily over and above scientists, had a very different view of the life and the planet around us. At that time in the 1800s, most thought that the planet was just around 6,000 years old. And I don't know if there's differences on that number, but long and short of it, compared to what we know today, they didn't think the Earth was very old. And although fossils had been discovered and seen, um, that there wasn't really much connection with respect to their age, like what we were talking about when we talked about Earth and how life begins, right? And for the most part, scientists believed really that the organisms and the Earth itself really remained unchanging and kind of just this static environment. We have what we have, and this is it since all time past and all time to come. But what I want you to think about just for a moment before we delve into Darwin and his theory is try and think about what we talked about at the beginning of the year. What are three similarities between living organisms and what are some differences? And I'm going to pause the video, or you pause the video, write down what comes to mind, and then start the video again. So I might have written down different things. I tried to write down most of the similarities, but in red it says similarities. Well, all things are made of cells. They require energy. They reproduce, whether we're talking about individual cells or multicellular organisms. They contain DNA. Organisms evolve, they grow, etc. Right? So all life shares these similarities. But what about differences? Well, we could take each one of the things that they share and also show how it's different. So, for example, all things are made of cells, but cells are different. Some are prokaryotic cells and have no nucleus or organelles, and some are eukaryotic cells, right? All organisms have to require or obtain energy, but they may do it differently. Plants photosynthesize prior to cellular respiration. Um, we could say all organisms undergo some form of cellular respiration, but that may look differently, whether it's aerobic respiration or anaerobic. We could say all living things reproduce, but some might reproduce asexually and some might reproduce sexually. So, with all the similarities that exist, that's an important concept because it shows that it's quite possible for life to evolve from the same thing if we share all these similarities. At the same time, if we look at how they're different, we can argue that life evolves and changes, right? So those are two really important things and things that Darwin's thinking of as he proposes his theory of evolution. Just some fun facts there about Darwin, if you want to look through those. But what I want to focus on is this voyage and this trip that Darwin went on the HMS Beagle. And he spent 5 years on this trip traveling around the world between 1831 and 1836. It's also important to understand that his theory of evolution by natural selection evolved over decades of research and collecting information, of which his trip was kind of a culmination of his past work and experience and basically uncovering some support for the way he was thinking about life and how life came to have been. So, throughout this voyage and the decades of research prior, Darwin believed first and foremost that evolution occurs. There was no question in his mind that evolution occurs. And he believed that modern organisms are descendants, sorry, I'm going to pause, descendants from common ancestors. So very important. He believes evolution occurs and Modern organisms are descended from common ancestors. Secondly, evolution occurs by a process of natural selection. And so he doesn't just randomly come up with this idea and these thoughts, right? They're based on his observations, right? Things that we talk about that make scientists good at what they do, right? They're keen observers. Nothing to them is unimportant. His trip allowed him to visit new environments with amazing diversity that he had never seen before, right? He was witness to geological activity, things like earthquakes, landslides, stuff that changed the landscape, right? He observed land formations that were once beaches built up over time, so he could sort of see in the nature, like if you've ever seen the Dover Cliffs, right? That are essentially made of shells, these bright white Dover Cliffs. He uncovered ancient fossils that were very different from things he had seen, again, suggesting that life changes over time. And of course, during his time, artificial selection was a rampant process, right? In the process of dog breeding, right? And also within agriculture, right? That both farmers and those working in animal husbandry, right? Breeding animals, whether it be cows or chickens or pigs for specific traits, was rampant in his time. And so here we have humans being the agent of change, creating all these different characteristics in different organisms based on selecting for traits that we desire. And so it wasn't a huge leap for Darwin to believe that maybe nature and the environment, as it changes, could also drive evolution and drive changes in organisms. So he had some amazing ideas, but over the decades, he just sat on this information because, well, one, being from a very religious family, feared shaming his family because these ideas and beliefs went directly against the church. And like any scientist, he's skeptical, right? He needs more evidence. And so what was fundamental was the scientists that came before him and the knowledge that they brought that allowed him to develop the theories that he did. So I'm going to try and write these, but I may have to pause and I may type some of them out. So first and foremost was a guy by the name of Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. And what was key about Lamarck is that he also believed in evolution. So he believed, like Darwin, he believed in the idea of evolution. Right? So it's always good to have support out there, right? You have an idea, you might be a little apprehensive to present that idea, but when you've got support out there, you feel a little bit more secure in your own beliefs, right? So Lamarck believed in evolution, but he had a bit of a different notion. He also believed in descent from a common ancestor, but he had a different idea in terms of the process of how it occurred. He didn't present it in the same way as evolution by natural selection. He presented it as inheritance of acquired characteristics. And this is a little bit like what we talked about last week in my idea that, perhaps I could go to the gym, build some big Arnold muscles, and I would have offspring built like Arnold, right? This inheritance of acquired characteristics. Or we might think of a crab, right, could develop a larger claw, or maybe a smaller claw, a larger claw, or its claw might change just through use or disuse, right? If you use something more, maybe it gets bigger and it gets more developed, and then you would pass this trait on. That's the key, right? You pass on to offspring. Now we know that this is fundamentally incorrect, but nevertheless, you've got supporting ideas around the idea of evolution and that things change, right? Second guy to come along, and this is running more in line with Darwin's time. This guy's a little bit before or the beginning of Darwin's time, and Charles Lyell kind of runs through when Darwin is spending his decades of research. And Charles Lyell was a geologist, and so he looked at how Earth's landscape changes over time, and that many processes that shape Earth occur over millions of years. Over millions of years. And so, in fact, the Earth is not 6,000 years old, but probably millions. And of course, he was still way off even then, right? Not 6,000 years old, but older. And this was important for Darwin because for him to believe in what he was thinking, that evolution occurs by natural selection, that it would have to take longer than this 6,000 years that people believe the Earth was. Lastly is a guy by the name of Thomas Malthus, who was a population ecologist, and he looked at how human population grows over time, right? So human populations grow over time, but are subjected to things like disease and famine, limited resources, right? And due to this, that there would be a struggle to survive. Okay, so any population in which there are limited resources would experience this struggle to survive. And this is where we most commonly think of, survival of the fittest. So, and Darwin didn't really ever coin this phrase, to my knowledge, I don't think, but it's inherent in this idea that, or in the reality that any organism has limited resources. And so when we consider not just an organism, but a population of organisms, say a population of deer or a population of wolves or a population of people, that when you have limited resources, there's going to be a struggle to survive and a struggle to exist. And this could pave the way for evolution by natural selection, in which only those best fit survive and pass their traits on. So it's with this mounting support, right? All these guys that have come before him or during his time, in which Darwin was starting to recognize the value of his ideas. And at the same time, a guy by the name of Alfred Wallace, shown in the picture here, guys are like brothers, but he was communicating with Darwin as well and starting to present his ideas. And well, I mean, competition, pun intended. I think Darwin got to the point where he wanted to present his information before somebody else jumped the gun and got the credit for it. So it spurred him on to publishing his book on the origin of species in 1859. And I think hopefully Darwin acknowledged Wallace for that inspiration and the support through the similar kind of work and ideas that he was showing. So that's it. We'll see you in class tomorrow.